Welcome to One Voice Evolving Season 2. Our guest today is Marie LaChapelle, who is a seasoned executive, former consultant, risk management executive in financial and manufacturing industries. She is the author of Dear White Lady, a series on a smart stack at substack.com, and you can find her on Blue Sky. Her episode 7 about Dear Mrs. White Lady, it is about racism, is going to be the core of what we talk about today. She has humor, she has intelligence, and she has historical data like I've never seen. So please welcome us and enjoy the show. So tell me about Dear Mrs. White Lady, how that was born, and why Substack.
Um, I'll answer Substack first because it's easier. Um, I listen to a lot of political podcasts, mostly on YouTube. I pretty much cut off any of the networks. I just don't watch any of that anymore. But everybody always said follow me on Substack, so I'm like, I'm a little behind the curve here, Maria. You got to get up with the kids and figure out what's going on with this Substack thing. I'm like, this isn't so big deal. It's just a whole lot of essays, and they're deep, really, really well written. And I was like, wow, this is really more my form of what, if I want to get up in the morning and have something to feed my brain, this is where I'm going to go. And I discovered that around Christmas time, just this past Christmas, and started reading some people. I'm like, oh, pretty good thoughts. Might have a little thought to send back. But so that's the Substack piece, and it really just occurred, out of a natural growth and curiosity for me. Mm-hmm. And then the Dear Mrs. White Lady, it's really, I'm writing a letter to a neighbor who lives just across the way. I'm in a condo development here, and I see you. And I apologize. She had been helping me out last summer. My car had been hit in the parking lot. A delivery driver just smashed right in my back of my car. Anyway, had to take it back and forth to the body shop for estimates, repairs, and so on. And she had offered to give me a lift, and super, super friendly, nice lady. Someone you could just have a conversation with no on ramp, just you can just jump in a conversation with her. And she had said to me, I'm really worried about the direction this country is going. And I was like, oh, I think I know where this conversation is headed. And it's not, and I said, me too, but I think for different reasons, And she was going on about immigration. And the problem with immigration is, and I know that she was a stay-at-home mom. She's probably 5 years older than I am. I just turned 60. She has really never had to, be out in the marketplace. But for people who have to work, it can be very, very tough life to find work and stay employed through all the bumps in the economy. And I was talking to her about, immigrants are really doing a lot of the work in our, restaurants and back of house, and they're the ones out picking vegetables, doing, stoop labor, as they call it. And most Americans don't want to be a dishwasher and don't want to do that sort of work. And they really aid our economy because they pay taxes. They pay taxes into Social Security. They will never see the benefit of those taxes back when they retire like we will, because they don't have citizenship status to receive that as an American benefit. So they're paying taxes, they're contributing to Social Security, all this other stuff. Anyway, she's like, I don't believe any of that. So the next time we got together, I used to read the newspaper in the morning, and I always just went to the opinion page, and I circled a couple things, like need to read more about this, and I give myself a little homework every day. And I brought the article with me the next time I knew she was going to take me out. And I just like, oh, you don't just have to have this article with me. Let me just leave it in your car. You can look at it later. But here's some facts on immigration that I think you might, be interested in. And she said to me in a way that I can just tell you, Miss Kim, it broke my heart. She said, I'm not what you would call a reader. And I said, well, where do you get your information? How are you? And she's like, well, my husband and my family, they're really, really into politics and they know what they're talking about. And I just don't really want to spend my time doing that. And, there's that overlay of what you've talked about in the past, that white privilege of I don't have to be engaged because it doesn't affect me personally. But I think things will start to affect her personally. But that's really, I'm trying to reach that woman. I'm trying to talk to her. And darn it, if I don't feel bad that I didn't work a little harder before the election,
Yes, I do know.
And I mean, that comes from my heart. I'm getting a little choked up here, but I feel like I was a little wimp, and now I'm like, it's time to tell us white ladies how it is, because we don't have any problem telling other people what it is.
Right.
And the evolution of the letters, I think you can probably see it kind of starts with building a rapport and, hey, I might have seen you at the HOA or at Whole Foods Market when I'm buying my, expensive groceries. But I should have talked to you and I didn't. I'm really sorry. Want to kind of catch up, and it's the rapport building from there on. And then by the time I'm getting to my episode 7, which I think is the most important piece of my series so far, I just ripped the Band-Aid off. I'm like, we have to talk about some things, and a lot of things that I feel deeply about, but I haven't had the opportunity to talk to anybody about them specifically, excuse me, the intergenerational harm from us not pulling Black ladies up behind us just
Oh my God.
bugs the heck out of me. I mean, think of all, I think about these, for lack of better term, wash women who worked full-time jobs and took in other people's laundry at night as a separate source of income. And my own mother did that. And she also worked full-time. And we weren't, necessarily disadvantaged at all because of our race, but just by poverty and living out in the country area. But the amount of harm that has happened, the lack of their ability to create wealth, to go and get an education. I know that you did later in life, but they still can't step out of the workforce and go do that, and then, the whole disparity between what a white woman makes and what a white man makes. That's I checked the stats, and we make 82 cents to the man's dollar. So we're still 18% behind in everything, from building wealth ourselves, from having that money put away for retirement, that it compounds over the years. And Black women are even more at a disadvantage. They're making about 62 cents to the white man's $1 for the same work in the same position. Yep. And this is, if we had worked together over these years, what could we have accomplished? Instead, we clung to our sense of whiteness, and I can't get defensive about that. I see it for what it is. And a lot of people don't want to have this conversation, Miss Kim. They're just so afraid to tread out on that water because the ice is so thin,
Well, and so after the election, when 52% of white women either didn't show up or voted against what we all were working toward, and the Black women took a giant step back and said, don't even,
Exactly.
don't even. And I felt that. I'll cry. And by the way, for the record, these are not white women tears. I have to justify that every time I cry now. It's like, that's not what this is. But it was the first time in my life, and I am well over 60, that I stepped outside my front door and looked askance at my white neighbors, my white female neighbors, going, I don't know which side you were on. And I don't trust that you are a safe person in my world just because we look the same, which has always been my standard, right? The ones you don't trust are the ones that look different. No, 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 no. The ones you don't trust are the ones that are in your skin. And the best thing they ever did, I mean, I was on TikTok at that time, and it floored all of the white women voting blue and all that they had done and all the things they don't know what they're saying until it comes out their mouth, and even then they don't recognize it. To these Black creators and these Black women who had invested their life and soul and body and free labor into this event. The best thing they ever did was step back and say, you all need to get your shit together. You white women need to learn how to police your own selves. You need to develop your own communities because you don't know how. You are so busy backbiting and fighting and making us the problem when you're the ones who didn't pull your weight. So when they say F around and find out, yes, we all are. We're all in the same boat. It's not everybody's fault, but I am way past the point of saying, but I am a good white woman. No,
Yeah.
no, no. And that generational history is what drew me. This episode 7 of yours is going to be recommended reading for every white woman I ever encounter going forward. Because first of all, your writing style is riveting. And your insight is precise. And the depth of emotion that I feel when I read what you wrote moves me right into your scene. I can't believe you haven't written a book, but I'm sure there's going to be a book at the end of this series called Dear Mrs. White Lady. Okay.
Well, I've actually been asked by another author about that, and I said, the thought of writing a book and editing blue lines. I worked in publishing as an intern when I was in college. Makes me want to be physically sick because I know how tedious it is. But I think I would love to do a series, a podcast series where I read, the whole thing, but probably I would change the order a little bit. And maybe I would add in things that I haven't along the way. And of course, break up some things because episode 7, that was a monster ride, that one probably took me about 10 days to get through that. And all the ideas I've had for a while. So it wasn't, the creation of the idea is just, how do I talk to the Mrs. White Lady? So maybe she'll listen to me, just maybe.
Right.
And I thought, well, how do I like to be talked to? So I just said, I'm just going to talk to her like a friend. Just, I'm sorry. We should have had this talk earlier. And I'm sorry I haven't, it's like having to tell your best friend that their husband hit on you at a party or something. It's like, girlfriend, nobody wants to be the bearer of this news, but you need to know he's prowling around. And I just think that's the ladies' code, that we should always do stuff like that. But you don't always keep friendships doing that stuff, but I still think it's the right thing. So you had asked on your other podcast about people's journey and how they got to where they were. Yes. And I had asked you similar questions. And I don't know if you've talked about your journey on your own podcast. So I'm just curious because I haven't watched all of them.
Oh God, yeah.
And I don't have TikTok, so I didn't get in on that that wave.
Right. Yeah. I would say, I mean, I've lived a white privileged life, middle class, America. You know, I didn't start to wake up until George Floyd. And when that video happened, and it was the video, it was the fact that somebody caught that live action, so I couldn't deny it anymore.
Mhm.
And it was a pivot point for me because my mother's heart for his pain and his family and our country and all the stuff. It just came right here. But more than that, it started the process of me looking at my entire life through a different lens.
Mm.
When you find out your husband's been unfaithful, you all of a sudden everything from the beginning of the relationship is up for reimagination. Okay? When you find out you're in a religious cult, all of a sudden everything they taught you about the Bible is up for revisiting. When George Floyd happened and those police officers did what they did, my husband of 22 years, the father of my 3 children, was a police officer in Las Vegas in our early years.
Oh my
And
word.
he used to pride himself on going over to the black side of town, Mr. Mike, Big Mike, and doing damage, and would tell the stories with such pride. And it never registered in my 21, 22-year-old brain that there was anything odd about that.
Right.
Never registered, it never even registered. And my assumptions had always been that racism only happened in the South, and that was a long time ago because I was from the West and we were diverse and all the things I imagined.
Racism only happens south of the Mason-Dixon line.
That's what my parents
Oh,
taught me, right?
right.
As they were
Why?
teaching me that Black people weren't safe
Right.
for me.
Right.
So that started me on my learning. And that was during the pandemic. So all of a sudden, people like me had time to let new information in. And so I am like a sponge of knowledge. I'm always a full-time student. So I started working with white supremacy, with Black creators, with learning, right? Started the book studies. That's what white women do. We go to book studies. And so I went to book studies led by Black women. And over that next 3 months, some of the Black people leading that became disenchanted or exhausted or whatever from our white leechism, and there started to be conflict back. All of a sudden we weren't doing it right, we weren't doing it perfectly. A white woman's worst fear, oh no, I offended somebody, or I didn't look like I know what I'm doing, and so then I went to a white women's book study, and we were the blind leading the blind, man. And so we took the book and we said, okay, we're going to do this. But it was so hard. It was so hard to look to the truth and hold each other accountable and be nice at the same time. That piffled out.
It's nearly, it's almost, the conflict's too great. You hold that kernel of truth in one hand, and then you're trying to figure out, how do I get from there to here? And as your mind starts to go through that logical process,
focused on
Mhm.
helping. You're focused at that moment in time. You're the helper. You're the white savior. Even though you don't call yourself that,
Right.
you're gonna help because you're gonna learn, and and especially white women leaders, which is why that's who I work with now. So a couple of years pass, the 2-week pandemic thing turns into 2 years, whatever. Dr. Nikki Lanier, who has the Rare Woman Collective, of Black creator, who worked with the Federal Reserve. She's a very fabulous leader. Harper Slade.
Woman after my own heart. Okay.
She's amazing, amazing. Was doing a live event in Louisville, Kentucky for white women leaders, and she had room for 150 or 200 women. And I was getting on an airplane from somewhere, saw her TikTok, and was so drawn to her graceful heart and approach toward white women trying to help who didn't know what they didn't know, that I said, I just have to be there. And I pulled out things out of my butt and went. And it was 4 intense days of being in a room with white women leaders and watching them. I learned as much from the women in that room and how they reacted to her content and her presence as I did about systemic racism and why and what it cost me. But the part that pivoted my life there was the question that she asks every first timer. What has racism cost you, dear white lady?
Mm-hmm.
Because if you can't answer that, you are never going to have the heart or the guts to do what's required to change this system until it costs you personally and you can identify that. And so for me, it cost me relationship. It cost me safety because I was taught in my segregated world that we're not racist, even though my parents really were Archie Bunker and Edith. Okay. Um, that Black people were dangerous and you shouldn't go to that part of town and you shouldn't go to that store and you shouldn't this and that. And you children learn what they live. And then I, raised my children not to be racist because I always had Black friends, but I had to keep them secret, okay, because my parents. And
May
it was,
may I interrupt you for a moment?
yeah,
When you say you had to keep your friends secret, was that an overt, you know, thing, or did you just learn that we don't do that?
oh, the first time I played with a Black child, I was 4 years old in Dallas, Texas. We were visiting friends. I found a friend across the lake, a little Black girl. We were playing
Oh,
together.
I love when
It
you
was
get the friend at the lake cottage or whatever.
so much fun.
Yeah.
And I brought him home. And Texas, I didn't know anything then. And they made us stop playing and made her go home and called her some name and said, we don't play with that kind here. I was 4 years old. When I went back home to Henderson, Nevada, there was one side of the highway was Carver Park where the Black people lived, and the other side was no, not Victory Village. That was where my parents lived before I was born. Valley View, and those were houses where white people lived.
What
And
year?
I
About what year was this? In
19, that was about
70s?
19. I was born in 55. Well, that dates me. Uh, so it would have been 59, 60, 1960, right? Early 60s, because it stayed
Okay.
that way all throughout my elementary school.
So that was when redlining was happening, and
Okay.
yeah.
In the rest of the world.
Mhm.
And I would sneak out of the house. I would get my little sunsuit on and sneak out of the house and walk down our block and across the highway to go over there to their grocery store because Mr. Washington ran the grocery store. I was 5 years old and he was so nice to me. And I would take my penny candies and I would buy my penny candies and then I would come home. And every time I was coming home, I'd get across the highway back to my street to go home. And my brother who drove and my mother who did not would meet me in the street with a yardstick
Oh my word.
all the way home because I did that. And I continued to do that. It was worth the beating because they were nice to me over there.
Wow.
So what does it cost me? So by the time I was a teenager, I was 16. There was a boy I had a crush on from French class. He was Black and he was beautiful. And I knew enough to know that I wasn't allowed. And I hid and snuck intentionally and purposely that for 2 years. Um, and
I mean, I can only imagine the cost it would have been to you had that relationship been revealed
right,
with this beautiful person.
right,
If you were beaten by your own brother in public
right,
with a switch or a yardstick,
right.
and
Yeah.
as a child, what
Yeah,
would have happened to you as, a young woman coming into her own,
right.
because we get very dangerous at that age, to other people.
Yes.
Oh my
And so
word.
I
You
always,
you were really taking some chances.
I, I was born to tell people secrets. I was born for it. It's wired into me. My mother lied about her age. I was 4 years old. Somebody'd knock on the milkman would knock on the door. I'd run to the door to beat her. And first thing, you want to know how my mom is? She's 44. Okay. She hated that. And the more she hated it, the more I did it because it's who I am. So it's how we've arrived. Anyway, so but my test of so I was never I intentionally, and I used to think I must have been adopted into this family because I was nothing like them. And I intentionally was anti-racist as you could be under the covers. And I raised my children not to be prejudiced, but their father was this police officer who was entirely. So they chose their path and learned what they learned. But my daughter, we were separated, we were divorced when my daughter was a teenager, my youngest, and she dated a black boy in college. And he he was beautiful. And she brought him home. And I was like, this is a test of are you going to walk your talk? Because I've
Right.
talked it to them their whole lives. How am I going to be now when she brings him in to meet me? And it was fine. I was fine. She was fine. It was good. His family wanted nothing to do with that. His family made them stop seeing each other. That was the first time I ever realized, because it would derail his education and his trajectory of success in life to get tied up with a white woman. And I hadn't ever considered that. But that was the moment when we saw the difference between the children. My other daughter had this racist bent, and she couldn't believe that I was allowing that. Her older sister. I'm like, why wouldn't I allow that? I encouraged it. So there's always been that. It's just always been part of who I am. And this time, this is this point in life. And this is what I love about menopause and what I love about why I work with only women, mostly over 50, but I've said 40 because sometimes they're ready at 40, 45.
the their little turkey baster thing popped up. Yeah. Not baster, that's the wrong word. You know what I mean? When the thing says it's done.
They have to get enough through their programming and enough empty nesting and enough life experience to say, I have the time, I have the energy, I have the resources. What's my take on the world? What do I want to see for my grandchildren? And sometimes, like in my case, it takes interracial marriage in your children to say, oh my God, I can't stand for my grandchild to be treated this way. That sometimes will move white women. We will do things for our children we would never do for ourselves.
It's interesting that you say that, but there's the flip side too of people who say, oh, not in my house, tough love, whatever they called it when I was growing up. There's just as many moms who turn their back on their children because of these significant issues over who you love. And, to your credit, you had these experiences as a child, and, answering that question, I wrote it down because I thought how moving, what an important thing maybe for me to think on and write about. What has racism cost you? And if you can't answer the question, you don't have the heart and guts to get at this.
Yeah.
Boy, you've had some really deep, kind of formative experiences that who would have thought later, so much later in your life, you connected all these things together. It's beautiful. It's almost like a poem,
I'm not sure I did till you just asked me that question.
Oh, darling.
I don't think I've ever said that out loud in sequence before.
Wow.
But yeah, yep.
Well, this is what is so, I love the word awesome. So I'm going to say, this is what's so awesome about having conversation. The way
Yeah.
you have things structured, um, I appreciate how you let that ebb and flow happen naturally and give enough time to, still get, if you need 15 minutes of content, you can still have enough of that.
Right.
But
Yeah.
what a treasure you are, really.
Oh, well, thank you. Well, all I do now is I take what I know I'm good at, which is putting the elephant on the table. And One Voice Evolving started a year ago to keep me accountable. I started it
Yes.
because I know that if I don't do something every day to advance racial equity intentionally, I have the privilege of going back in my white bubble and riding this thing out. Whatever happens, happens. I'm not Jewish. I'm not Black. I'm not, whatever. And I don't want to do that. So I'm intentional about not doing that. And One Voice Evolving started out to be reclaiming joy in DEI because I was working with so many women who were burning out, our age, burning out, not given to the thing anymore because it was just so futile. It was so corporations were checking the box instead of doing the work, and it was awful. So I was coaching and that kind of thing.
May I interrupt? So
Yeah.
when you said you were working with women, were they primarily white women, and
Yep.
they were getting
Oh,
burnt out because,
yes.
well, I can assume, I'm just guessing, that the unseen labor at home, plus being put upon and having to work a little bit harder than everybody else to stay where you are, never mind to get ahead.
Well, that's standard.
Yeah.
But then when you're doing DEI work and they hire you, you're a white woman doing DEI work because it's a white culture doing it, and they maybe don't want to hire Black women, or Black
Oh, they
women
want the
are
messenger
too
to be the
intense.
messenger's the message. Okay. All right.
Those are the places that are checking the box.
Mm.
Those are all the places that have run away from DEI now. The ones who are checking the box because if they want a federal contract, they have to be
And
equitable.
Target, if you're listening, I hope you lose all your customers.
Hello.
Yeah.
Yep.
Thank you.
Absolutely.
No more interruptions from me.
Oh no, God, it's your podcast, you guys. Anyway, so my growth this year has been because of guests like you, because I bring my whole authentic self to the table. And what I said in the beginning is I don't want the academic, because we can all talk from our heads all day long about any topic. I want to pull back the curtain with guests, what's raw, real, and relatable for my white women, people who are watching, to get a sense that you don't have to be perfect. And it's not, and you don't have to change the world in your lifetime. You just need to take your next baby step. It could be over coffee with one of your children. It could be at your church when you're, in your little sewing circle. It could be, and I happen to have a voice, and I happen to have a presence, and I happen to have the credentials that give me access. And I thought I couldn't do anything else, but I can do a podcast. And besides that, I was sick and tired of getting, there's my aha. It's why I went off Meta finally. I have grown businesses, coaching businesses using Facebook ads since 2010. When I came in with racial equity, they wanted me, they considered it political, and I could not get past, and they quashed my content. They wouldn't take an ad from me a year ago because it was too political, because it said racial equity, too political. So that was even before this election cycle. And I realized for the first time, this is what Black creators are up against. You don't get a voice on our white platform. You can give us money and we'll take your money, but we're not gonna run the ad. I lost my mind. I've never been silenced like that since childhood, probably. And I lost my mind because don't tell me what to do. And so podcasting was the way, and Substack, why I'm on Substack, is the most authentic way I can get my voice out there to give voice to these other women. So season two was post-election, and season two is resilience redefined. And season three is going to be something else because I am much bolder, much braver, much more courageous, and people are responding. The quality of guests I'm getting this season, like you, are much deeper and seasoned and braver than I would have even attempted to ask to be a guest last season when I didn't know what I didn't know. Now it's your turn.
I'm not sure what question I'm answering.
Okay.
About my
Okay.
story, you mean?
Okay, help me.
How did I get here?
I would love for us to wrestle real time if you're willing
Yes.
with that question of what has racism cost you? Because you've heard my story.
Ooh, well,
Is it personal?
I'm recollecting a number of memories from childhood, and then all of a sudden I'm like skating ahead to when I was in college. So I'm in my mind, I'm thinking, why don't I have a memory of something in between there? So that all of a sudden is like a little bit of a red flag, because I was, I was in the bubble, but I remember my mother, and God bless her, she's still alive. Just saw her at Christmas with my dad too. He's 90 and she's 89, and they're just they haven't lost any of their get up and go in their get up and go, if you know what I mean. They just love to talk. But my mother didn't speak English until she was nearly 20. She was raised in a French community by her parents, French immigrants. Her mother was Parisian, her father was Quebecois, and she didn't know anything else but, the Latin mass, and she went to school in French, and she did not experience like a good outcome when she finished school, because she couldn't find work. She became a switchboard operator and a secretary, and difficulty with language and learning, even though she's incredibly bright, incredibly sharp. But she wanted us to learn English at home. There were no Black people in our community at all, but there was the house down the street, the big farmhouse on the end that had the yellow dog out barking that never was, taken care of, or never seemed to, be fed or looked after. And they had a Confederate flag out over the front of their porch. And I remember us driving by in the station wagon. We had that old, ugly paneled station wagon. When my dad got a little more money, we had a blue station wagon, but she said, don't ever go to that house. And the way she said it to me, I felt like, oh boy, there's something going on there. Now, I didn't understand anything about racism. I did not know anything about what that flag symbolized, only that there was something there that she was really afraid of, and afraid of for me. And, I'm like a little white kid, like I went everywhere. I slept out in the snow in the winter. I went everywhere with my dog. People were hunting. I was always making sure I was wearing orange, I had free reign out in nature, but I really didn't understand it until I was much, much older. And when I jump ahead to my experience in college, I had received, after years of being unseen as a gifted student, I had received a full scholarship to Mount Holyoke College, which is a women's college in Massachusetts. It's relatively prestigious. A lot of people here in the South have never heard of it. It's not Harvard, Yale, but yeah, it is. Kind of is.
Yeah, it is.
but it has such this wonderful legacy. The thing that I really glom down to is their legacy is they produce women who go on to do great things. And one of the scholarship program I was accepted into was called the Frances Perkins program. And Frances Perkins was the first woman ever to serve in a presidential cabinet. She was the one who created all the New Deal documents for FDR. She traveled around the country. She looked at the poverty. She looked at what could be done. And through, he signs the pen. Thank God he did. But through the eyes of a woman, this stuff happened. So it gave me a great sense of encouragement that my life was going to take a turn for the positive, and that I also needed to remember I had to give something back at some point.
Mhm.
Not sure what that thing would be, but knowing that, someday somebody's going to come ask me for something, and not in a quid pro quo kind of thing, but just, be cognizant that, to those who have received much, much is expected, right? And I had this young friend, Timbali was her name. She was Black South African, and she lived. I'm not exactly sure of her township, but it was like 50 miles outside of Soweto. So not in a larger village, but routinely these men would come through her village and do God knows what to the women, steal the children, and never to be seen again. And this one day, he came through to her house, and her older sisters were not there to protect her. And she had a very, she just had a fierce, inner strength. And he was talking to her in her language, in her dialect, and she refused to speak her own language to him. And that act of defiance cost her a beating. And she said, to this day, I do the same thing all over again. But that, whatter came into our home, our village, and our home to do harm to us. Why should I even bow down even more to him? And I was like, my God, I've never in my life had to deal with anything that difficult. We're afraid to sneeze in church, right? This woman has, has gone through so much. And I think I was about 20 at that time. She probably was 17. So this probably happened to her maybe when she was, 12, 13, 14. And it just opened my eyes to things that, maybe I could learn a little bit more. And I signed up for, it was the first year they were teaching African American, is what they called it, African American literature, introduction to. And I was like, oh, maybe this would help me kind of expand some things that I'm not even aware of. And of course, love and literature. Well, the professor, who is clearly at least half white and Black, had me, the only white kid in the class. There was only 8 of us in the class. He asked me to write an essay why I wanted to join the class. And I was like, well, that seems like a barrier too far, thank you, kind sir, But then I thought about it, and I was like, just suck it up. You want to take the class. And also, maybe he's trying to teach you a lesson that this is what Black women have. They have to work a little bit harder to justify why they're even there, to get their seat at the table. And the lesson, I took the lesson. Nobody had to explain it to me. I figured that out. And I went on to really read some of the most important works, The Invisible Man. I read Zora Neale Hurston's Their Eyes Were Watching God, The Bluest Eye with Toni Morrison, all these books. And I never would have read any of this I was reading Paradise Lost and Milton, and I had a class in meta discourse and from Aristotle to Plato. And, I was all in this esoteric stuff. And I really, really was struck by one book. It was called The Street. And I'd forgotten her name, and I looked it up this morning. It was Ann Petrie. And she talked about, I think the opening line might have been, "The street has eyes." And the whole book was really about the sexual brutality focused on Black women, especially Black girls in their own neighborhood, and racism and classism. And that you're always being watched, that you're not free at all, even with your own people. And then I came across the other day, yesterday, I think, with Zora Neale Hurston, kinfolk aren't my skin folk aren't my kinfolk.
Yes.
Or maybe it's the other way. I think I got it wrong.
But that it is the skin folk and kinfolk is what it
Yeah.
is. I did the same thing.
And so that was kind of my trajectory through college. And then after college, I worked in New York City. I worked around some extremely prestigious Black people who were extremely high up in the banking industry, attorneys. I didn't see around me this diaspora of Black, oppression. But a lot of us who are young and trying to get ahead, we would come in on Saturday mornings and Sunday mornings with our little coffee and our little, tweed jacket or whatever, and our jeans, and try to get a leg up on the next week. And one of the young gentlemen, actually dated him for a while. His name was Ian, and he came in on Saturdays and Sundays. I'm like, "Where are you going? You look like you're going to a wedding or something." It was summertime. And then one day he came in, I said, "You must be going to the US Open," because the US Open was happening. And he's like, "No, I'm not going to a tennis match. If I don't dress nicely, they don't let me in the building on the weekend," because the security guards didn't know him. And I'm just like, oh my gosh. Ugh. And because I just cared so much for this person, I was really hurt. And I wanted to, I want to go do something. Like, what am I going to do? Nothing. And I did nothing. But it helped me understand that you don't always see things that are right there in front of you. And through my career, I had opportunities to be advocates for employees in unionizing situations, to take the temperature, if you would, of employees. And this one company was the old International Harvester. I spent about 2.5 years just interviewing employees in all their different plants around the country. And I had a lot of awakenings about race. Even when I think something wasn't about race, it turned out it was. And one of the problems was one plant in particular. It was right outside of Memphis, Tennessee. Had the worst morale, and was uncanny how different that one plant was related to everyone else, every other plant. And so I'm thinking, okay, it's a leadership problem, right? Well, it was really a legacy problem, because the company, when it was when that plant was bought and sold, nobody cared about those employees. They were just numbers on a spreadsheet. It was 10,000 people, 5,000 people, a zero on the end, lose it. People were hired, fired, and rehired. But there was also a plantation mentality about how people overlooked the manufacturing process.
Tell me more.
And that one experience, I didn't know such things existed. And this was back in, she was 2000. And when I reported back to management, I give big board presentation, and because I was an outside consultant and there was oversight from the board, they also wanted to read my materials. And when I got to this part of the communication, I hesitated and I said, some of this may be hard for you to hear, and kind of gave my perspective. And the CEO looked around at all his, like, sideways, like side-eyed, and not in a good way. Like, which one of you guys is responsible for this crap? Because I'm being embarrassed here and I don't like this. And his embarrassment turned to kind of a fury over the next several months. And I worked with him. We went in that plant 3 times a day, all 3 shifts, for a week at a time. He ate with them. He drove his own car, put his own gas in his rental car. Sometimes he'd go to the plant without me, which I used to find funny, because I was like, I'm not own the company, but you're the CEO, you can do whatever you want. You don't have to apologize to me. But he really got angry about it. And I just like that quote, if you don't know what you've lost from it, you don't have the heart and the guts to do the work. He did, he did. He took it seriously. And that kind of was, I think those are kind of the turning points, I think, that really focused me on what I'm not aware of. And then when I began teaching, I had so many student athletes who were Black, and they were there on merit alone, because just because you got a scholarship to play football or basketball does not mean that you can keep your scholarship. They have to get the grades and everything else. And boy, did they work hard. And I developed a relationship with 6 of these young Black women on the basketball team, and they had made me their honorary coach. And I'd go to the games, and I'd be right there next to the coach, cheering them all on and everything else. And when I developed breast cancer, they had a fundraiser, and they kind of named me as their honoree, even though it was dedicated to, all women who maybe have been touched by breast cancer. And it was just so moving, because they did this whole video montage, and it was in this, in the basketball stadium. And I was like in tears. I was just broken down by it. It was just like, people care so much, so very much. And then after that, I went on, even after I stopped teaching, because I didn't return to work after that, but I went on to speak at their ongoing fundraisers. They kept going with it. And, year after year after year, I was doing that. And since I've moved out of state, I haven't been invited back, but also all those ladies are on their way in their careers. They're already out in the world, But when George Floyd happened, I reached out to them each individually and just said, I'm sending a letter to all the girls, but I just wanted you ladies to know that I'm so sorry about this murder in plain sight. It sickens me. It's not what our country should be about. And yet here we are, and said, if anybody wants to reach out, just, call me or text me or what have you. And a couple of them did just call to say, it meant a lot, because our white friends don't say anything. They don't even acknowledge it happened. And to them, it's like, we live in this fear. How could you not recognize how important this moment is? So when you touched on it, it really struck at me too, Kim, because I remember that moment. And it seemed that his death continues. It just happens over and over and over again, because we've all seen that tape. Mm-hmm. The trauma doesn't end with the event.
Right.
Yeah. It's with the recognition of who we are, what monsters we can be,
Or with the fact that everybody was Black Lives Matters, Black Lives Matters until it was inconvenient. And then they disappeared. So 6 months later, after that,
Mm,
all of a sudden, all that white support and all of that, okay, we're on to the flavor of the day, on to the next thing. And we left it like it never happened before it was ever really resolved. So part of our social media and our isolation from COVID and the perfect storm of events in the world has led us to be far more reactive than intentional activists about things that are deep and core and matter. And
it's
how do we, by telling our story, and it's only in the stories, and that's what I love about your writing. It's only in the stories that people have a heart connection. It's not the data points, it's not the historical legacy, it's not how Social Security was established. It was when
right.
I realized that my children, because of their father's military service, got educational benefits when I was a single mom that allowed them to go to college and get a leg up
Mm,
and to have a stipend while they attended college, which I never got to have because of that. But when I discovered that Black veterans, the VA was not established for them and they served, but they didn't get the benefits. And therefore, again, another place that legacy wealth through the family line was denied. The the juxtaposition of our lived experience of privilege that we just I assumed was across the board for every veteran had not always been. Voting rights, I assumed were across the board for every woman. It wasn't until, and I'm like, I have a master's degree, educated at the best schools in the country. How did I never hear about this? Juneteenth. How did that happen? I have so much to say.
yes, the Juneteenth story. I referenced that. I didn't mention it specifically, but writing, I think it was in my second episode about, from this naivete of, gee, even in the 1800s, the mail took incredibly long. It took 2 years for the Emancipation Proclamation to reach Texas. Oh my word, you know, um, and that was really what the whole Juneteenth was about. Is when they finally were given release of their
Yes.
captivity, brutal barbarism
Mhm.
of their lives.
Mhm.
And yet, even after that, the promise of America still didn't exist for them. Now, Jim Crow and everything else.
Mhm. Right. And history is whitewashed off the books. You
It
know,
never happened.
it never happened.
It never happened like that. Yeah.
No, nope.
One of the things I love about Substack is I can find some original source articles back from 1700s, 1800s from the newspapers. And a lot of the content that I get comes directly from those little squibs that I find. And there's no whitewashing the truth of 600 people came to a hanging on a Sunday and ate deviled eggs, lemonade, and had whiskey was passed around. And the horror to me of this is what people did for fun.
Right.
They're all sociopaths, is what I'm thinking, right? I mean, seriously, this is what you go do?
Yeah.
What is wrong with us? And it was an institutionalized method of scaring the bejesus out of people who were of color,
Mhm.
and also anybody who wanted to be an activist. You're going to be hanging from the tree next to them.
Right.
And it's just so sickening to me that this occurs. I was equally frustrated and hurt when I watched that video of the two Nazi Graham and Gramps, as I call them, who came in and they wanted their Nazi knives Nazi'd up a little bit more, a little jazzier. They wanted some more Nazi emblems put on them. And I imagine it was probably for a gift or something to somebody. So who would they gift it to? Children, college age children, or teenagers, or what have you? And the fact that the gentleman who owned the shop wouldn't do the work, I think he said, I ain't doing no Nazi shit. I could
My God.
denazify it, but I'm not going to re-Nazify it. And I went through and I just thought, for several days, I just thought, Kim, of all the things that they lived through, they've got to be older than me, probably by 10 years. They've had to have gone through all the things that I listed, after the World War II. They would have known about the concentration camps. They would have known about white supremacy. They would have known all these things. And yet, life in their 70 years, nothing broke through. Nothing. How can that be that we walk amongst these people?
Yeah. Yeah. I think part of it is they didn't have access to mobile news. They had the they had the
You're too kind.
they had the
It was
reels
the
in
front
the
page.
movie
It was
theater.
the front page of every newspaper.
Well, I had to read, right? We're back
Yeah.
to
You were
yeah.
young. You were younger than that, though. You were
I was a
probably
bit
5 years
younger.
old. You weren't reading newspapers yet.
We are still, and I draw a parallel, history and today. So it's like I can't believe they were like that, and yet that is where we're headed back to.
Yeah.
And I had to, and I have to regulate on top of all of the change in my consulting and my life and all that. I have to regulate the way I take in information and when. If I take it in right before bed, I have nightmares. If I take it in the middle of the night, then I've had a 5-hour sleep cycle. If I take it in the morning, I'm sick. So how do I stay abreast of things? But so I take myself to the 50,000-foot view and go, okay, wait a minute. My parents lived through World War II. They were born right after World War I. So they lived through World War II, Korea, where my father served, Vietnam, and I think they might have been around, they probably passed just before Iraq. Okay. So they've been through wars and rumors of wars. This is nothing new.
Mm-hmm.
But the difference is because I'm looking at me, my children, and my grandchildren, and we are so soft about resistance. We are so insulated from the hardships of war, even though we see it on the TV. We see the crash into the towers. But we never had to stand in line with rations for butter or silk hosiery like my mother did. And we didn't live through a depression so badly that you had to move your family and what belongings you have in the back of the truck to the Dust Bowl to try to find sustenance.
Right.
And I thought this that I have to accept is that this may be the season of hardship that every generation for millennials of history has endured. We know about war, but we have never lived the hardship that we are fearfully facing right now. And therefore, we have never developed the strength that the Black people had in the Underground Railroad to escape the South to go to Canada through our little town, only to have the state of New Hampshire erase that 100-year history and have it uncovered in the last 15 years. Because according to the state's records, there was never a slave owner or a slave in the state of New Hampshire. We were spotless until they discovered Portsmouth, New Hampshire was a slave trade harbor.
Right.
So I'm looking for resilience for women, white women who have never experienced that kind of hardship, who've been able to go to their bubble, who now are being forced to feel and see and look and live differently than they ever have with no historical context. To bring that historical context in and say, women abolitionists were a real thing. And it's the reason the Underground Railroad succeeded, because they had the heart and the soul and the strength to influence those white men who were making the policies, whose husbands were senators, while they had a safe house on the railroad train, on the main road.
And there are stories about the parallel universes between what you described in New Hampshire and the ladies from Rochester. I don't know if you're aware, but there were a group of abolitionists from Rochester, very well heeled, very well funded, who had the ear of their husbands and their families' money, and they did a lot behind the scenes, but their funds actually helped move people from hither to thither. But that was courageous in and of itself, and they stepped out of their bubble.
Yeah.
We have, as all these things that we've talked about. Last summer, I couldn't bring myself to tell my friend, my acquaintance, that she was wrong. Everything was just, oh, I don't want to hurt your feelings, and maybe you want to read this article, and I'm not really a reader, and how fawning we've been about this. And that bothers me, because I know that I couldn't change the world, but maybe I could have changed a corner,
One, I use the starfish analogy.
Uh,
Throwing all the starfish back into the sea, this child and this guy saying, you're never going to save all of them. You're never going to make a difference. And the kid picks up one and throws it in the sea and says, made a difference to that one.
yeah.
All right. That's me. One voice evolving. And
Wow.
we've moved from the singular to the collective. And as we move to the collective, resilience is our stage 2. What do you offer to women to be resilient in this time and find their voice differently than a year ago?
Well, it's funny that you would ask that question, because I give talks on this topic. And the teaching that I have given previously to this past election has been that you need to create a strategy of resilience for your life. That means your fellow sisters, your friends, find the people who are going to be your touchstones. And I gave examples through, about my life and when I needed those people. Nobody said, this is really important. They knew when I said, I need you, I'm on the next flight. Yes, I'll come, but the difference now with the resilience is we have to learn that we don't have glass jaws. We can pick ourselves up, and we need to get, for our own dignity, we need to get to the next place. And everybody has to do it in their own way, but do something. And that I think doesn't sound like resilience. It sounds like action. But when you look at it on the other side of 5 years, it'll make you feel better that you were able to survive through all of that because you took action. It's a present to your future self,
Perfect.
It's been my pleasure, Miss Kim.
Thank you. It has been my absolute pleasure. And I just don't know that I'm not going to make it up to where you are one of these times I'm in Georgia.
Well, I can, get in my little car. It has a little steering wheel, and I'm only an hour from Savannah, so I'm not sure where you are. But if I can come see you and bring you flowers or something while you're doing all your work, or maybe bring you some Chinese food or something, I'll be happy to do that.
Let's look for a midway point. Thank you for your time. It has been glorious.
It's been my pleasure. You honor me so much with the invitation. And I look forward to watching more of your pieces.
Good. And I'm waiting for the book, but your Substack is stellar. I can't emphasize it enough. So I'm gonna.
Wow. Well, you touch me. I have I have my own feelings that I think, it's pretty good. But it's so nice when someone else has the kindness to say so, Thank you.